Privacy usability is the difference between a control that exists on paper and a control that real people can actually use when they are in a hurry, distracted, or unsure what a setting means. Many privacy failures are not caused by malicious intent or even by broken technology, but by ordinary users misunderstanding what is happening or being unable to find, interpret, or trust the choices they are offered. When you test privacy usability thoroughly, you are not trying to prove that users are careless. You are trying to prove that the product communicates clearly, asks for data fairly, and makes privacy protective choices workable. Audio-first methods are especially valuable because they force you to focus on the user's mental model rather than on visual polish, and they help you evaluate the experience as it would be understood through narration, help text, and the sequence of decisions. Beginners sometimes assume privacy usability testing requires a lab full of screens and prototypes, but many high-impact findings can be discovered by testing language, timing, and decision points through carefully structured spoken scenarios. The goal here is to learn how to test privacy usability using audio-first methods that surface confusion early and translate that confusion into concrete design improvements. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CyberAuthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful starting point is to clarify what privacy usability means, because it is not the same as general usability. General usability is about whether a user can accomplish a task efficiently, while privacy usability is about whether a user can understand and control data processing in a way that matches their intentions. That includes whether the user knows what data is being collected, whether they understand why it is needed, and whether they can choose a less invasive option without breaking the product. It also includes whether the user can find settings, interpret the effect of toggles, and revisit choices later without feeling trapped. Beginners often treat privacy as a compliance topic and usability as a design topic, but privacy controls are part of the product, and if they are unusable, privacy promises become hollow. Another important idea is that privacy usability is not only about the most careful, informed user, but about typical users with limited time and attention. A control that requires deep technical knowledge or careful reading will protect only a small minority, while the default will govern everyone else. Testing privacy usability therefore focuses on whether the product helps ordinary people make informed decisions without forcing them to become experts. Audio-first testing is a way to pressure test that clarity through spoken comprehension and decision-making. Audio-first privacy usability testing begins by defining what you want to learn about the user's understanding and choices, because testing without a clear purpose can turn into open-ended conversation. You might want to learn whether users understand what a permission request means, whether they can distinguish between essential and optional data use, or whether they can locate and use a setting to reduce tracking. You might also want to learn whether users understand the consequence of declining a choice, such as whether a feature still works or whether they will see repeated prompts. Another common goal is to learn whether users understand how data is shared with third parties, because sharing is often described in language that users interpret incorrectly. Beginners sometimes think usability testing is about whether users like the product, but privacy usability is about whether users can act in alignment with their own preferences. Audio-first methods work well here because you can present a scenario and listen to how users interpret the information in their own words, which reveals mental models and misunderstandings. When the goal is clear, you can design test prompts that elicit specific evidence of comprehension rather than vague opinions. The output should be insights that lead to design changes, not just a summary of user reactions. The core ingredient of audio-first testing is a scripted walkthrough of a privacy-relevant moment, delivered as spoken narration, that mirrors what the product would communicate. This could include a permission prompt, an onboarding explanation, a privacy setting description, or a notice about data sharing. The key is that the script uses the same language the product intends to use, because privacy usability problems often live in specific words like personalization, partners, or improved services. In an audio-first method, you read the script to participants and then ask them to explain what they think it means, what they think will happen next, and what choice they would make. Beginners sometimes assume people will answer what you want to hear, but spoken explanations often reveal real uncertainty, such as a user believing that turning off personalization stops all tracking, or believing that a privacy toggle affects only ads when it actually affects analytics as well. The method can also test timing by introducing the prompt at different points in the narrative, such as before the user understands the feature versus after they experience the benefit. When you test comprehension through spoken recall, you learn whether the language creates the intended understanding without relying on visual cues. This is especially useful for products that must be accessible to users with varying abilities and literacy levels. Another valuable audio-first method is the Think Aloud protocol, where the participant narrates their reasoning as they make a privacy decision. Instead of asking what they would choose after the fact, you ask them to talk through what they are considering, what they are worried about, and what they believe each option does. This method reveals decision drivers, such as fear of losing functionality, desire for convenience, or mistrust of vague language. It also reveals where users feel pressured or confused, such as when they interpret a choice as mandatory, even if it is optional. In privacy, Think Aloud is especially helpful for identifying dark patterns and coercive friction, because users will often say things like, "It seems like they want me to click allow," which signals that the design may be nudging rather than informing. Beginners sometimes think testing should avoid influencing participants, but in Think Aloud testing, you want to hear their natural interpretations, and you can do that by using neutral prompts like, "Tell me what you think will happen if you choose this option." You can also test whether users notice important details, such as data sharing or retention, when those details are included in the script. The result is a clear map of where comprehension fails and why, which leads directly to content and design changes. Privacy usability testing should also examine the user's ability to find and use controls over time, not just at first-run prompts. Audio-first methods can simulate this by describing a situation where the user wants to change a setting later, such as after experiencing targeted ads or after reading news about data breaches. You can ask the participant where they would go in the app to change the setting, what words they would look for, and what they would expect the setting to be called. Even without visuals, this reveals whether the product's naming and organization match user expectations, because users often search for terms like tracking, privacy, location, or ads, while products may use euphemisms that hide the function. You can also test whether users understand that a setting exists at all, which is a major usability issue when controls are buried. Another important aspect is whether users believe their choices will be respected, because skepticism can lead to resignation where users stop trying to control privacy. Beginners sometimes focus only on disclosure quality, but control, discoverability, and trust are equally important for real-world privacy outcomes. Audio-first testing can reveal whether users feel empowered or defeated by the control structure. A thorough approach also tests the clarity of data use explanations, especially the difference between essential processing and optional processing. Many products blur this line by presenting everything as necessary to improve the experience, which can undermine meaningful consent. Audio-first testing can present participants with an explanation and then ask them to identify what is required to deliver the service versus what is for analytics, marketing, or product improvement. If participants cannot distinguish these, that is a usability failure because it prevents informed choice. You can also test whether participants understand concepts like third-party sharing, because many users interpret partners as trusted collaborators rather than separate entities that may have their own interests. Another important test is whether participants understand that some data use continues even when settings are disabled, such as security logging or basic operational analytics, and whether the product explains that in a way that feels fair. Beginners sometimes assume more transparency is always better, but the goal is clarity, not volume, and audio-first testing helps you see whether added detail improves understanding or creates overload. When participants can restate the meaning accurately, the explanation is working. When they cannot, the design needs change. Privacy usability testing must also examine the consequences of choices, because choices that lead to confusing outcomes create mistrust. In audio-first scenarios, you can describe what happens after a user declines a permission, such as the feature offering a manual alternative, and then ask whether the participant feels the outcome is fair and workable. If declining leads to repeated prompts or degraded experience that feels punitive, participants will often describe it as pressure, which is a privacy impact. You can also test whether participants understand that some features require data to function, such as navigation requiring location, and whether the product explains that dependency honestly. Another important area is whether users understand how to reverse a decision, such as turning a setting on later, and whether they understand whether the system will delete previously collected data. Beginners sometimes overlook reversibility, but reversibility is central to user control because people change their minds and situations change. Audio-first testing can reveal whether the product communicates reversibility clearly or whether it leaves users uncertain and anxious. A product that supports reversible, understandable choices tends to build trust over time. Testing privacy usability should include a diverse set of participant perspectives, not to satisfy a checkbox, but because privacy impacts differ based on context and vulnerability. A person in a shared household may worry about notifications revealing sensitive content, while a person in a public-facing role may worry about location exposure and harassment. Younger users may interpret language differently and may be more influenced by social cues, while older users may be more cautious, but also more confused by technical terms. Audio-first methods can be especially inclusive because they do not require visual acuity or familiarity with interface patterns, but they also require careful language to avoid jargon that excludes participants. Beginners sometimes assume testing should focus on average users, but privacy risk often concentrates in edge contexts, such as people facing stalking or communities targeted for harassment. Including a range of perspectives helps you identify where controls and explanations fail under pressure, which is where harm is most likely. The goal is not to overgeneralize from a small sample, but to identify recurring misunderstanding patterns and high-impact confusion points. When patterns appear across different participants, you have strong evidence that the design needs improvement. A crucial part of thorough testing is translating findings into actionable changes rather than leaving them as observations like users were confused. Audio-first testing produces rich qualitative data, such as exact phrases participants misunderstood and exact assumptions they made about consequences. Those details should be used to propose concrete changes, like replacing vague language with specific descriptions of what data is used for, splitting bundled choices into clearer options, or adjusting timing so explanations arrive after the user understands the feature benefit. Another common action is improving naming, because users often search for privacy controls using everyday words, and if the product uses corporate language, discoverability suffers. You might also adjust defaults, because if many users misunderstand a choice, a privacy-protective default reduces harm while the product improves clarity. Beginners sometimes think usability findings are subjective, but when multiple participants interpret a phrase in a consistent wrong way, that is strong evidence that the phrase is not doing its job. Another action is to add verification steps, such as confirming that a setting actually changes data routing, because users often assume toggles change everything. Thorough testing connects user confusion to system behavior, ensuring that fixes address both the message and the mechanics. Audio-first privacy usability testing also benefits from measuring comprehension in a structured way, even if the method is primarily qualitative. You can ask participants to summarize in their own words what data is collected, who it is shared with, and what changes when they choose an option, and then evaluate whether those summaries match intended behavior. You can also use simple recall checks after a few minutes to see what the participant remembers, because privacy choices often need to be understood quickly and retained at least long enough to feel meaningful. Another useful measure is confidence, not as a goal in itself, but as a signal of whether the design produces clarity or uncertainty. If participants are consistently uncertain, they may either decline choices out of fear or accept choices out of resignation, neither of which produces healthy consent. Beginners sometimes worry about quantifying user studies, but light structure can help teams compare versions of language and see which one produces better understanding. The key is to avoid turning the test into a quiz. The goal is to test the design, not the user. When structured checks are paired with open-ended explanations, you get both measurable insight and rich context. Finally, thorough privacy usability testing includes iteration, because one round of testing reveals issues, but improved designs must be tested again to confirm that the changes actually fix the problem. Audio-first methods make iteration easier because changing language and flow timing can be done quickly and retested without rebuilding full interfaces. After changes, you should test not only whether users understand better, but whether the product still feels fair and usable, because clarity that creates unnecessary fear can be counterproductive. You should also test whether improved explanations remain short enough to be heard and understood, because long scripts can overwhelm attention, especially in mobile contexts. Beginners sometimes treat testing as a one-time validation, but privacy usability is a moving target because products change, user expectations evolve, and new features introduce new data uses. Iteration builds a culture where privacy controls are treated as living product features that need ongoing improvement. It also supports trust, because products that respond to confusion with better communication and stronger controls tend to earn credibility over time. Testing becomes not an obstacle, but a feedback loop that helps the product mature. Testing privacy usability thoroughly with audio-first methods means embracing the reality that privacy is experienced through understanding and control, not through hidden technical claims. You begin by defining the privacy decision moments you want to evaluate and by using the product's intended language as the test material. You use spoken walkthroughs and think-aloud reasoning to reveal how users interpret prompts, what they believe will happen, and what trade-offs drive their choices. You simulate later-life scenarios to test discoverability and trust, because privacy controls must work beyond the first run. You examine essential versus optional processing clarity, third-party sharing understanding, and the fairness of consequences when users decline. You include diverse perspectives because privacy harms concentrate in vulnerable contexts, and you translate findings into concrete design and system changes rather than vague observations. You add light structure to measure comprehension and confidence without turning users into test subjects. And you iterate because the only trustworthy control is one that remains usable as the product evolves. When these practices are followed, audio-first testing becomes a powerful way to ensure privacy choices are real, understandable, and aligned with the user's intentions, which is what turns privacy commitments into everyday product reality.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.